I canceled every payment in 11 minutes. Truck, tuition, renovation loan, grocery transfers, everything. 11 minutes. Then I put the kettle on, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at my kitchen table with both hands completely steady. Because 20 minutes before that, I had been standing outside my son's front door, holding a birthday gift I built with my own 2 hands, and I heard my daughter-in-law tell my son that I didn't need to come anymore. She doesn't need to show up, Ethan. Honestly, the most useful thing she does is send money. She didn't know I was there. She had no idea what she had just started. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're watching this alone tonight, you are not alone. Subscribe. You belong here. I canceled 11 payments in 11 minutes. I want you to understand what that means. Not the money, not the amounts, not the logistics of logging into a bank website at midnight and clicking through confirmation screens one by one. I want you to understand what my hands felt like while I did it. Steady, not shaking, not hesitating, not hovering over the mouse the way they do when you're about to do something you're not sure of. Steady, like I was paying a bill, like I was doing something completely ordinary that I had simply been waiting too long to do. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 67 years old. I live alone in the house where I raised my son, and for 3 years after my husband Gerald died, I told myself that giving everything I had to Ethan's family was love. I was wrong. It wasn't love. It was fear wearing love's clothes. And it took 8 words from my daughter-in-law, 8 words she never meant for me to hear, to make me finally see the difference. It was a Thursday in October, Noah's 10th birthday. I had been working on his gift for 3 weeks. Not bought, built. A small refractor telescope, navy blue tube brass fittings, velvet-lined case. On the side panel, I had fixed a small nameplate, Noah Gerald Wilson. Gerald, my husband, Noah's grandfather, had died 2 years before of pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis. To the last morning I held his hand. He was the one who first showed Ethan the night sky. Lying on a blanket in the backyard when Ethan was small, pointing up at Orion at the dippers, making up names for the ones he couldn't remember. I wanted Noah to have that. Something physical. Something that said your grandfather was here and he loved the sky and now you can love it too. I wrapped it carefully, tied the bow 3 times until it looked right. I drove to Clover Ridge Lane. The front windows were open warm, October afternoon, the kind that feels like summer making one last quiet argument before it gives up. I parked, walked up the front path. I was 3 steps from the door when I heard Rachel's voice through the window. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was walking to the front door. I just heard, "Doesn't she call first? Why does she always just show up like this?" My feet stopped. Not because I told them to. They just stopped the way the body sometimes moves faster than the mind when it recognizes danger. Ethan said something low, muffled, his peacemaker voice. I knew it instantly, the careful, modulated tone he used when he was trying to smooth something over without actually addressing it. I know, Rachel said. But Ethan, she sits there and stares at everything. She makes it weird every single time. It's Noah's birthday. It's supposed to be fun. She means well, Ethan said. I know she means well. A pause. The specific pause of someone who has been holding something back for a long time and has finally decided to stop. But she doesn't need to come. Honestly, if she wants to be part of this family, she can just send money. That's actually the most useful thing she does. The showing up is just, I don't know how the sentence ended. Because something happened inside my chest. Not dramatic, nothing like the movies, no gasp, no tears, just a door, closing. Quietly, firmly, the sound of a lock turning somewhere deep and permanent. The most useful thing she does is send money. I looked down at the gift in my hands. The navy blue tube, the velvet case, the nameplate that said, Noah Gerald Wilson. I set it down beside the door. I did not knock. I did not ring the bell. I did not make a sound. I walked back down the front path, got in my car, and drove home. Here is what I did not do that night. I did not call Ethan. I did not send Rachel a message. I did not cry into a pillow or call my sister or pour myself a glass of wine and rehearse the confrontation I wished I had the courage to have. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark and I thought, not about what Rachel said, I already understood that completely. What I thought about was the years before it, how we had gotten here, what I had been telling myself while it happened. Gerald died on a Tuesday morning in March. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks. The doctor said the word, and Gerald looked at me and I looked at him, and in that look we said everything we needed to say about what the next 6 weeks were going to be. They were hard, they were sacred, and then they were over. And when they were over, I did what I had watched my own mother do after my father died. I made myself useful. I made myself necessary. I told myself that being needed was the same thing as being loved, and I believed it. God help me, I believed it completely, because the alternative was to sit in my quiet house with Gerald's absence filling every room like water filling a ship, and I did not know how to survive that. So I gave. I started small. Dinners at their house twice a week, picking Noah up from school on Fridays, covering groceries when Rachel mentioned casually over the phone that they were having a tight month. Then the kitchen renovation. Rachel had shown me a photo on her phone, white quartz countertops, open shelving, the kind of kitchen you see in magazines. She'd shown it to me the way women sometimes show each other things they love, but cannot have, with a kind of wistful, resigned sigh. Someday, she said. I wrote the check 2 days later, $11,000. I told myself it was because I wanted to, because I could. Because what was the point of having money if you couldn't use it to make the people you loved happy? I did not examine what I expected in return. I should have examined it. Then came Ethan's truck. He bought it 3 months after Gerald's funeral, a big, expensive, unnecessary truck that made me uneasy in a way I couldn't quite articulate at the time. Gerald would have said something. Gerald would have looked at Ethan over the dinner table and said in his quiet, dry way, "That's a lot of truck for a man who drives to an office." But Gerald was gone, and I said nothing. Except when Ethan mentioned 2 months later that the payments were steeper than he'd anticipated, I offered to help, just temporarily, just until they found their footing. That was 26 months before the night I sat in my dark kitchen. The tuition was Rachel's idea. She'd found a private school with a gifted program, and she walked me through the brochure over coffee one afternoon with the focused precision of a woman making a presentation. Small class sizes, individualized curriculum, above-average outcomes. "I just want the best for him," she said, looking at me with those clear, steady eyes. "I thought you'd feel the same way." What was I supposed to say? "No, Rachel, I want my grandson in the mediocre school. $17,000 a year." I did not ask how long. I did not set a timeline. I simply started the automatic transfer and added it to the quiet ledger of things I did for my family without making anyone feel bad about needing them. 2 vacations I wasn't invited on. 1 sofa. 1 gym membership full year paid up front. Rachel's 40th birthday dinner. 14 people, a restaurant where I somehow ended up at the end with the check. I did not make a scene. I never made a scene. That was the deal I had made with myself unconsciously, completely the way we make the most consequential deals of our lives. I would give without complaint, and in return I would be included, welcomed, valued. I would be part of something. Sitting at my kitchen table that Thursday night, I understood for the first time how that deal had actually worked. I gave without complaint. They took without gratitude. And somewhere in the years between Gerald's death and Rachel's voice through an open window, I had stopped being a mother and a grandmother and a woman and become something else entirely. Infrastructure. I opened my laptop. Bank statements. 3 years. I pulled them up and started at the beginning and worked my way forward and did not let myself look away. It took me 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, I had a number. I will not tell you the number. Not because I'm ashamed of it, I'm not, but because the number is not the point. The point is what I felt when I saw it. Not shock, not even anger, recognition, like finally seeing something that had been in plain sight for years, but that you had been too afraid or too busy or too desperate to keep the peace to look at directly. I opened a new document, started at the top, kitchen renovation, $11,000. I worked forward, everything. Trucks and tuition and groceries and vacations, and the birthday dinner for 14 at a restaurant where the salmon was $42 a plate. I listed every transfer, every check, every automatic payment. I was precise. I did not editorialize. I did not write, and this broke my heart beside any of them. Facts, just facts. At the bottom of the document, I typed 1 sentence. The support was given out of love, but love without respect has a limit. I read it back. Then I printed 2 copies, folded them into a large envelope, and wrote Ethan's name on the outside. I set the envelope beside my laptop, opened my bank's website, found the recurring truck payment, and canceled it. One click. I sat with that for a moment. The simplicity. 26 months of automatic faithful, unasked for payments, and one click. Then I found the tuition transfer, canceled it. The renovation loan installment, canceled. The grocery transfer, the one I'd started as a temporary measure 18 months ago and never stopped, canceled. Every automatic recurring scheduled payment I had set up for Ethan and Rachel's household. All of them. 11 minutes, both hands steady. When it was done, I closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light, went upstairs. I did not sleep well, but I slept. And when I woke up in the morning before my feet hit the floor, before the first clear thought arrived, I felt like myself. For the first time in 3 years, I felt exactly like myself. I drove to Clover Ridge Lane before 8. I did not call ahead. I did not want a conversation, did not want to be talked out of anything, or smoothed back into the comfortable arrangement where I stayed quiet and kept giving, and everyone pretended that was a family. I walked to the mailbox, put the envelope inside, drove home, made coffee, sat at the table, looked at Gerald's photograph on the shelf across the room, him grinning at a camping trip, squinting into the sun, not knowing yet that in 11 years he would be gone, and I would be sitting in our kitchen alone, trying to remember how to be a person and not just a function. I'm figuring it out, I told him. My phone rang at 9:14. Ethan. Mom. Careful voice, assessing voice. Hey, so I got an alert from the bank about my truck payment. Yes, I said. It says the payment was declined. Did something happen with your gig? Canceled, I said. Not declined, canceled. A pause. You canceled it. Yes. Mom. The careful voice slipped just slightly, just enough. Why would you do that? Check your mailbox, I said. Then call me back. What does the mailbox have to call me back after? I said, and I hung up. He called back in 14 minutes, but when I answered, it wasn't Ethan's voice. Margaret. Rachel. Flat. No warmth. Just my name like a door closing in my face. Good morning, Rachel, I said. What is this paper sounds? She was holding the document. It's a record, I said. Everything I've contributed over the last 3 years. You printed a list. Her voice had a particular quality, not quite anger, not quite disbelief, the specific tone of a person who has never before been held accountable and doesn't yet understand what's happening. You printed a list of every single thing you've ever given us like you're keeping score. I'm not keeping score, I said. I'm being honest. They're different things. This feels like a threat, Margaret. It's a document. Canceling Ethan's payments, that's not a document. That's a threat. That, I said, is a decision. Silence. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into its most controlled register, the one I had watched her use in rooms full of people when she wanted to establish who was in charge. You cannot do this. We rely on those payments. We have a budget. I know you do, I said, and now the budget will have to change. Because you're angry. I thought about that honestly. No, I said, I'm not angry. And it was true, I was not operating from anger. Anger is hot and blunt. What I was operating from was cold and precise. I'm done. Done. She said the word like it was a foreign word she was testing. Done, I said again. Rachel, I was standing outside your door yesterday, before I knocked. I heard what you said about me. A silence that was different from the others. Tighter. Whatever you think you heard, I heard it clearly, I said. You said I don't need to come. You said the most useful thing I do is send money. I paused. You weren't wrong. That is what I've become. That's on me as much as it's on you. I let it happen. I kept my voice level. But it stops today. You are going to destroy this family. No, I said. I'm going to stop pretending that money and love are the same thing. I heard her breathing. Read the last line of the document, I said. There's one sentence at the bottom. Silence. Then she hung up. I sat with the dead phone in my hand, looked at Gerald's photograph. Outside the window, the morning was ordinary. A neighbor walked a dog. A car backed out of a driveway. The sky was the flat gray of an October morning that hadn't decided yet what kind of day it intended to be. I had spent 3 years making myself invisible in order to stay welcome. 3 years shrinking and giving and keeping quiet. 3 years paying not just with money, with myself. with the parts of a person that don't show up on bank statements: dignity, presence, the right to be in a room and be seen as a person and not an asset. I had paid all of that quietly and called it love. I picked up my coffee cup, put it in the sink, rinsed it, and then I went to my garage in my house on property that was mine, and I looked at what had accumulated there over 3 years. Because there was one more thing left to do, and the morning was still young. The garage door took 3 tries to open all the way. The spring mechanism had been sticking for months. Ethan had promised to fix it back in the spring, then forgot, then promised again, then forgot again. I had been meaning to call someone. I never did. Too busy taking care of everything else to take care of my own house. I stood in the doorway and looked at what was inside. Gerald's workbench was still there along the far wall underneath everything. I could just barely see the corner of it, the dark wood edge he'd built himself, the pegboard above it, where he used to hang his tools in careful labeled rows. Gerald was meticulous about his tools. He said a man who couldn't find his wrench in under 10 seconds didn't deserve to own one. Everything else in the garage belonged to Ethan and Rachel. I don't mean that loosely. I mean that the space Gerald had used, the space I had allowed my family to borrow temporarily, that was always the word, temporarily had over 3 years become a storage unit for their overflow. Boxes of Rachel's off-season clothing labeled in her precise handwriting. Furniture they'd replaced with the kitchen renovation money, a perfectly good dining table, and 6 chairs pushed against the wall because the new one was more magazine-worthy. Exercise equipment that had been used for approximately 6 weeks before being disassembled and brought here because it cluttered the spare room. Noah's old toys, not sentimental ones. I would have kept those, the cheap plastic things that pile up like sediment in a family with a child just moved here instead of thrown away. My garage, my house, my dead husband's workbench buried underneath someone else's life. I went inside and found a box of large trash bags under the workbench. Gerald used to buy them in bulk at the hardware store, the heavy-duty black ones that could hold anything. I shook one open. Then I stopped. I stood in the middle of that garage trash bag in my hand, and I made myself do something I'd been avoiding since midnight. I let myself feel it. Not the anger, the grief. Because underneath all the clarity, underneath the steady hands and the canceled payments and the cold, precise thing I'd been operating from since 8 words through an open window, there was something much older and much softer, and it needed a moment before I buried it under action. I had loved Ethan his whole life. I had loved him before he was born, loved him through every stage of himself. Loved him through the years when he was easy, and the years when he wasn't, loved him through Gerald's illness and Gerald's death, and every ordinary Tuesday morning since. I had loved Rachel, or tried to see in her what Ethan saw, tried to meet her where she was tried to build something. And I had loved being needed. That was the hard truth. That was the one I had to hold. I had loved being needed so much that I had let need replace respect, had let myself become so useful that I stopped requiring anything in return, had loved so loudly with my checkbook and so quietly with my voice that the people around me had simply adjusted. To a Margaret who gave everything and asked for nothing and showed up at doors she was no longer wanted at. I let myself feel that for a moment. 60 seconds, maybe 90. Then I opened the trash bag, walked to the first stack of Rachel's clothing boxes, and started moving them toward the garage door. I wasn't throwing anything away. I'm not a vindictive woman, but I am a woman who was done letting other people's belongings occupy my space while they occupied my life. I worked for 2 hours. By the time I was done, everything that belonged to Ethan and Rachel was stacked neatly at the end of the driveway, covered with a tarp I'd found folded on the workbench, labeled boxes, disassembled furniture in organized piles, nothing damaged, nothing thrown out, just moved from inside my home to the property line where it belonged. I pulled out my phone and texted Ethan one sentence. "Your belongings are in the driveway. Please collect them at your convenience." I went inside, washed my hands, and started making lunch. My phone started ringing 4 minutes later. It wasn't Ethan this time. I looked at the screen and felt a small cold shock. It was Rachel calling directly from her own phone, which she almost never did. In 3 years of living nearby, Rachel had called me directly exactly 4 times, and 3 of them were to ask me to watch Noah. I answered. "You put our things in the driveway." Not a question. "I did," I said. "Margaret." A pause, And in that pause, I heard something I hadn't heard from Rachel before. Not anger, not calculation, but something that sounded almost like alarm, like the moment when a person who has been very confident about something suddenly isn't. You put all of our things out of your garage onto your driveway. That's right. You can't just... She stopped, started again. Some of those boxes have my winter clothes in them. They're covered with a tarp, I said. They won't get wet. That's not the Margaret. What are you doing? It was a real question. I could hear it underneath the composure, underneath the flatness she usually operated with. There was something genuinely bewildered in her voice. She had a model for me. For 21 years, from the day Ethan introduced us over an uncomfortable dinner at a restaurant downtown, she had had a very specific model of who Margaret Wilson was and how Margaret Wilson behaved. Generous, accommodating, conflict-averse, available. The model was no longer working, and she didn't know what to replace it with. I'm reclaiming my space, I said simply. My garage belongs to me. It's been used as storage for 3 years. I need it back. You need the right now today. The same day you cancel all our payments and send us a document, you need the garage back today. I've needed it back for a while, I said. Today I did something about it. I heard her make a sound, not a word, just a sound, the sound of a person rapidly recalculating. We have nowhere to put that furniture right now. You know that. Our place doesn't have... That's a challenge I trust you to solve, I said. You're a very capable woman, Rachel. Silence. And then very quietly, in a voice I had never once heard from her in 21 years. Why are you doing this to us? To them. Not to the relationship. Not to me, not to what had happened, not to the 8 words through an open window. To them. Rachel, I said, and I kept my voice as even as I could because I was not going to cry and I was not going to yell and I was not going to perform anything for anyone. Yesterday you told my son I didn't need to come to my grandson's birthday party. You told him the most useful thing I do is send money. I paused. I heard you. I was standing 3 steps from your front door. The silence that followed was different from anything that had come before. It was the silence of someone who has been caught, truly caught, no room to reframe, no angle to work, and doesn't yet know what to do with it. She started. You don't have to explain it, I said. I'm not calling to have an argument about whether you meant it or how I took it. I'm calling because you asked me a question, and I want to answer it honestly. I took a breath. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I should have done it a long time ago. I let things go too far for too long, and that's on me. But it stops now. Rachel said nothing. Please get the furniture out of my driveway when you get a chance, I said. If it rains before then, the tarp will hold. I hung up. My sandwich was still sitting on the counter, half made. I finished making it, sat down at the table, and ate every bite. Ethan came at 4:30. I heard his truck, the expensive, unnecessary truck that I had been paying for over 2 years, pull into my driveway. I didn't go to the door. I was in the living room with a book I wasn't really reading, and I waited. He knocked. I counted to 3, put the book down, and opened the door. He looked terrible. Not in the way of someone who has been crying, in the way of someone who has been on the phone all day, having conversations they weren't prepared for. His hair was wrong. His collar was slightly off. Ethan always had himself put together. That was Gerald in him. The attention to presentation and seeing him disheveled meant the day had cost him more than he'd anticipated. Mom, he said. Ethan, I said. Can I come in? I stepped back from the door. He came inside and we stood in my front hallway and looked at each other, and neither of us spoke for a moment, which was not something that had happened very often in 41 years of being mother and son. We had always been talkers, Ethan and I. Gerald was the quiet one. We were the ones who filled the silence. But that afternoon we stood in the hallway, and I let the silence do its work because I wasn't going to smooth this over. I wasn't going to make it comfortable. Not this time. Not anymore. Rachel called me, he said finally, about the garage. Okay, I said, and I read the... He stopped, started again. I read the document, Mom. Good, I said. He rubbed his hand over his face, a gesture so specifically Gerald's that it hit me somewhere soft and unexpected. Gerald used to do that when he was working through something difficult. Right hand across the face like he was wiping the problem away and starting fresh. I didn't know those were the numbers, Ethan said. You didn't ask. No. He looked at the floor, then back at me. I didn't ask. You never asked, I said, not viciously, just factually. Every time something came up and I offered to help, you said yes. You never asked how I was managing it. You never asked if it was too much. You just said yes, and then the next thing came up and you said yes again." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought you wanted to help." "I did want to help," I said. "That's not the point." "Then what's the point?" "The point," I said carefully, "is that wanting to help and being expected to help are two completely different things. And somewhere along the way, without anyone saying it out loud, we moved from one to the other." Ethan looked at me for a long moment. He had Gerald's eyes gray-green, the kind that were hard to read until you'd known them for years. I had known his for 41 years. "Rachel said you hurt her," he said, "yesterday." "Yes." "The thing about not needing to come." "Yes." He closed his eyes briefly. "Mom, she was just frustrated. She didn't—" "Ethan." My voice was quiet. "Don't." He stopped. "Don't tell me what she meant. Don't explain it. Don't manage it." I looked at him steadily. I heard what she said. It wasn't the first time she'd felt that way. It was just the first time I heard it out loud. And once you hear something like that out loud, you can't pretend you didn't. He was quiet. "You should have defended me," I said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just true, and I said it the way true things need to be said, sometimes plainly, without softening, without the apologetic padding I usually wrapped around anything that might cause discomfort." Ethan looked like I'd pressed on a bruise. "I know," he said. "When your wife says those things about your mother, you say something. You don't manage it. You don't smooth it over. You say, 'That's my mother.' We don't talk about her that way." "I know, Mom. Do you—" "Because this isn't the first time, Ethan. This is just the first time I'm saying it." He sat down on the bench inside my hallway, the old one, the wooden one. Gerald built the first year we were in this house, the one that still wobbles slightly on the left side, because Gerald always meant to fix it, and never did. He sat on it and put his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor the way he used to stare at the floor when he was a teenager and had done something wrong and didn't know how to start making it right. Some things don't change. Some things absolutely have to. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. His voice was quieter, younger almost. The careful composure was gone, and what was underneath it was something closer to the Ethan I had raised, the one who still knew in some fundamental place that his mother was a person and not a system. "Right now," I said. "Get the furniture out of my driveway before it rains. After that," I paused. "After that, I want you to think, really think. Not about the money, about what kind of relationship you actually want with me." He looked up. "I want you in my life, Mom. You know that." "I know you want me in your life," I said. "I'm asking something harder. I'm asking you to decide if you want a real relationship with me, one where I matter as a person, not as a resource, or whether you want to keep the arrangement we've had." I looked at him. "Because I will not go back to the arrangement. I need you to understand that. That's not a threat. It's just the truth." He was quiet for a long moment. "I've been a bad son," he said. "You've been an absent son," I said. "That's different. Absent sons can show up." He looked at me, and for just a second in those gray-green eyes, I saw something that I hadn't seen in years, something real and unguarded and young. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "I know," I said. "I know you are." And I meant it. He was. But I also knew, had learned the hard way in the long school of loving people who disappointed me, that sorry was the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. And this conversation, the real one, the one we actually needed to have, was only just beginning. "Get the furniture," I said. "Then go home and talk to Rachel. Not about me, about yourselves. About your budget, about what you actually need, and what you've just gotten used to having. That conversation is between you and her." I paused. "The conversation between you and me can happen whenever you're ready." He stood up. He looked at me the way people look when they're trying to memorize something, like they're afraid it might change. "Will you answer if I call?" he asked. "I'll always answer," I said. "That's never been in question." He nodded, turned toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "The telescope," he said. "The one you left on the porch. Noah hasn't stopped talking about it." Something moved in my chest, warm, complicated. He looked through it already. "We set it up that night," Ethan said. After everything, he found Saturn." A small, complicated sound that might have been almost a laugh. "He cried. Mom, the kid cried because he found Saturn." I thought about Noah Gerald Wilson, about the nameplate, about Gerald lying on a blanket in the backyard, pointing up at Orion. "Tell him his grandfather would have loved that," I said. Ethan nodded, and then he left. I stood in my hallway after the door closed, and I did not cry. I stood there, and I listened to the sound of his truck backing out of the driveway, and I thought about all the years between the day I brought him home from the hospital and this moment, this hallway, this wobble in Gerald's old bench, and I let the full weight of it sit on me for just a moment. Then I went back to my living room, picked up my book, and went back to the page I'd been pretending to read. That was a Thursday. On Friday, Ethan sent 3 men and a rental truck for the furniture. They were professional and quick, and did not speak much, which I appreciated. By noon, the driveway was clear. I did not hear from Rachel. On Saturday, Noah called. Not Ethan, not Rachel. Noah, who was 10 years old and had found Saturn calling his grandmother on Ethan's phone because he wanted to tell me something. "Grandma," he said, "I saw 3 rings." "Did you?" I said. "3 clear ones. Dad said there's more, but 3 is what I could see." He paused. "Grandma, is it true Grandpa Gerald used to look at stars?" Something caught in my throat. "He did," I said. "When your dad was about your age, actually." "Did he have a telescope?" "No," I said. "He just had his eyes, and a very dark backyard." Noah was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a child processing something. "I'm going to look for Jupiter next," he said. "Mrs. Alderman at school said you can see the moons." "You can," I said. 4 of them on a clear night." "Grandma," he said it the way children say it before something important, pulling slightly on the word like knocking softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you mad at us?" The directness of children. It has always undone me, the way children go straight to the thing adults spend so much energy circling. "I'm not mad at you," I said immediately. "Not even a little." "Are you mad at Mom?" I thought about how to answer that. 10 years old deserves honesty. 10 years old also doesn't need to be handed the full weight of adult conflict. "I'm working some things out with your mom and dad," I said. "Grown-up things. It doesn't have anything to do with you." "Dad seems sad," Noah said. "He'll be okay," I said. "He's figuring some things out too." "Are you coming over soon?" And there it was. The real question. Not Saturn's rings, not Jupiter's moons, not whether I was mad. The real question was whether his grandmother was still going to show up. "I'll come when your mom and dad and I have worked things out," I said. "But Noah, I want you to know something. That telescope has your grandfather's name on it because he loved the sky and I love you, and those 2 things go together. Okay, that's not going to change." "Okay," he said. "Go find Jupiter," I said, "and call me when you do." I heard him smile. You can hear a child smile over the phone. There's a particular quality to the silence that precedes it, a lightning. "Okay, Grandma," he said. "I love you," I said. "Love you too," he said, and hung up. I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand, and this time I did cry. Not long, not dramatically, just the specific tears of a woman who has been holding a great deal together for a great deal of time and needed to set it down for a few seconds. Then I dried my eyes, put the phone on the charger, and made myself dinner. The first week was strange, not terrible strange, like the specific strangeness of a house after you rearrange the furniture. Everything is still there, everything still functions, but your body keeps reaching for things that are no longer in their old places. I had built my life for 3 years around being available, around being the person who answered every call and covered every gap and was always there. And now I was not unavailable, but simply myself. An ordinary woman in her own house living her own days. I hadn't realized how long I'd forgotten what those felt like. I started taking morning walks again. I'd stopped when Gerald died and then kept not starting again because the mornings were when I was often driving somewhere or waiting for someone to call. Now I walked. Down the hill and back through the neighborhood, nodding at the same retired couple who walked their ancient beagle every morning at 7:15, watching the neighborhood shift from late October into early November, leaves down and the sky going gray and clean. I called my sister Barbara, who lives in Phoenix, and who had been saying for years gently and diplomatically that she worried about how much I gave to Ethan's family. I had always brushed it off. Now I called her and told her what had happened, and listened to the silence on the other end of the line, which was the silence of a woman who had been waiting a long time to hear exactly this. "Finally," Barbara said. "Just that. One word." "You're not going to say I told you so?" I asked. I already said it, she said. 4 separate times over 3 years. I just didn't say it to you. I laughed. For the first time since Thursday, I laughed, and it came from the right place, the real place, not the performing okayness place. Come visit, Barbara said. Come for Thanksgiving. The weather is beautiful, and I have a guest room that has been waiting 3 years for you to use it. I might, I said. You will, she said. I'm buying your ticket. She bought the ticket that afternoon. I found the confirmation in my email before dinner. I sat with it for a long time, Thanksgiving in Phoenix with Barbara, her husband Carl, their adult kids, and their sprawling, complicated family, away from Clover Ridge Lane and automatic payments and the quiet diminishment of a life that had slowly, completely been given over to other people. I said out loud to the empty kitchen, I'm going to Phoenix. It felt extraordinary. It was just a plane ticket. It felt extraordinary. On the 9th day, something happened that I hadn't expected. I was at the grocery store, just my groceries, an almost radical act of self-directedness when I ran into Linda Marsh. Linda had been my friend in what felt like a previous life before Gerald died. We had been close, she and her husband Tom, dinners together, the 4 of us summer cookouts. After Gerald died, I had slowly, without meaning, to let the friendship go quiet. Too busy being needed, too busy being useful. Linda saw me from across the produce section and actually walked faster. Margaret Wilson, she said, where have you been hiding? Inside my own life, I said, more than I should have been. She looked at me for a moment, that look people give when they're checking whether you're okay, the real okay, not the performed okay, and then she said, you look different. Good different or bad different? Good different, she said immediately, like you finally got some rest. We stood in the produce section for 45 minutes. We blocked the apples for at least 20 of them, and neither of us noticed until a man reached around us apologetically for a bag of Granny Smith's. We both laughed. He looked startled. Linda and I made plans to have lunch. Real plans, not the we should get together sometime plans that mean nothing but actual plans. A date a restaurant we both liked on Millbrook Avenue 2 weeks out. I drove home with my groceries feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly. Something adjacent to happy. Something like the particular sensation of a window opening in a room that has been closed for a long time. 11 days after Noah's birthday, Ethan came back. Not to the driveway, not with a moving truck, not to have the practical conversation. He came to my front door on a Tuesday evening at 6:30 and he knocked, and when I opened the door he wasn't holding anything, and he wasn't calling ahead, and he didn't have a reason rehearsed. He just stood there. I wasn't going to call, he said. I thought if I called I'd talk myself out of coming. Come in, I said. We sat at the kitchen table. Not the living room, not the carefully neutral space of people having a formal conversation, but the kitchen, the table where Ethan had done his homework and eaten his breakfast and talked to his father about baseball and girls and what he wanted to do with his life. The table felt right. I made coffee. We sat across from each other. He started talking, and I let him talk without interrupting, because this was a conversation I had waited for, and I was not going to rush it. He talked about the week, about sitting with Rachel and actually doing what I had suggested, talking about their finances, their budget, what they actually earned versus what they actually spent versus what they'd been quietly relying on me to cover the gap. He said that conversation had taken 3 days and not 3 easy days. We were spending more than I realized, he said. A lot more. I knew we were comfortable. I didn't realize how much of that comfort was yours. Did Rachel know? I asked. He thought about it. I think she knew it was significant, he said. I don't think she knew the full amount. She was surprised by the number. Was she? I said carefully. I know how that sounds, he said. Given what she said, he looked at his coffee cup. She's not Mom. Rachel isn't a bad person. She's someone who got very comfortable with something she should have thought harder about. So did you, I said. So did I, he said. I know. And before Rachel, I said, because I needed to say this, before we figure out anything about my relationship with Rachel, what about you and me, Ethan? What do you want that to look like? He looked at me directly. I want my mom back, he said. The version I had before things went sideways. He paused. The version that wasn't just available. The version that had her own life and invited us into it sometimes instead of the one who was always waiting on the edges of ours. Something shifted in my chest at that. Not dramatically, just a small, significant click like a dial turning to the right setting. That's a version I want back too, I said. I should have defended you, he said. Again. He needed to say it more than once, and I let him. When Rachel, what she said, the way she's talked about you sometimes, the way I've just let it go. I should have said something a long time ago. I made it easier for her to feel that way about you by never pushing back on it. This was the thing I had needed to hear. Not the apologies or easy apologies cost nothing. This was the analysis, the honest reckoning with his own part. This was harder, and it mattered more. Yes, I said. You did. I'm sorry. I know, I said. And Ethan, I played a role in it too. I made it easy to take me for granted. I never said no. I never drew a line. I kept showing up and giving more every time I should have said, this is too much, this needs to change. I looked at him. We both let it go too far. He nodded. We drank our coffee. Outside it had started to rain, the slow, steady November rain that settles in for hours. No drama, no thunder, just a persistent gray resolve. The kitchen felt warm. What happens now, he asked. Now we figure it out, I said. Slowly. Not with grand gestures, just differently. You come for dinner because you want to see me, not because you need something. I come to Noah's birthday because I'm his grandmother, not because I've paid my way in. I paused. Rachel and I will have to find our way. I don't know what that looks like yet. She feels terrible, he said. Does she? I said. Neutral, not cold, not warm. She does. She hasn't said a lot, that's how she is. When she's ashamed, she goes quiet. But she's been different this week. Quieter. She packed up some of the stuff in the garage herself, the clothes boxes. She didn't have to, she just did it. I listened to that. I'm not looking for a dramatic moment, I said after a moment. I'm not waiting for a grand apology. I thought about how to say it. I just want to be in a room with people who are glad I'm in the room. That's all. That's the whole thing. You're glad you're in this room, he said. Aren't you right now? I looked at my son. 41 years old, sitting at my kitchen table in the rain, having the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Looking at me not as a resource, not as an account. Looking at me the way he'd looked at me when he was small and the world was difficult, and I was the person who could help him figure it out. Yes, I said. I am. He stayed for 2 hours. We talked about Gerald, really talked about him the way we hadn't since the funeral, when grief had been too raw for anything except the managed version of itself. We talked about Gerald's workbench in the garage, which Ethan helped me uncover that evening, moving the last of his own boxes from around it. We stood at the workbench with our coffees and looked at the pegboard where Gerald's tools had hung, the outlines still faintly visible where Gerald had drawn around them in pencil, so he'd always know exactly where everything went. How was meticulous, Ethan said. Obsessively, I said. You hated it when you were 12. I loved it when I was 25, he said, when I needed to know how to fix things and realized I'd never paid enough attention. He would have taught you, I said. You just had to ask. I know, Ethan said. I've thought about that. We stood at Gerald's workbench in the cleared-out garage with the rain coming down outside and something that had been broken between us. Not everything, not entirely, but something real and important began very quietly to mend. Not fixed, not resolved, not tied up neatly the way stories sometimes pretend things can be tied. Just mending, which is its own kind of miracle if you are patient enough to watch for it. I went to Phoenix for Thanksgiving. Barbara picked me up at the airport herself, didn't send Carl, came herself, stood at the arrivals gate with her silver hair and her enormous sunglasses and the specific posture of a woman who is extremely pleased with a situation she helped engineer. She hugged me for a long time. You look good, she said. You look like yourself. I feel like myself, I said. When's the last time you could say that? I thought about it honestly. A while, I said. She took my bag, steered me toward the parking garage, talked the entire way about Carl, about the kids, about Phoenix in November, which she insisted was the finest weather in the country, and which I had to admit when we stepped outside into the warm desert air made a compelling argument for itself. We had Thanksgiving dinner with 11 people, and I did not pay for any of it. I brought wine, a contribution Barbara had specifically requested, and I sat at the long table and ate food I hadn't cooked and talked to people I'd missed and laughed, genuinely laughed from the right place, more times than I'd counted in a long time. After dinner, when the table was cleared and Carl had fallen asleep in the armchair and the younger generation was somewhere in the house being loud and content, Barbara and I sat on her back patio with the desert stars overhead and talked the way sisters talk when they finally have time. I told her everything. Not the abbreviated version, not the managed one, everything. The open window, the words, the 11 minutes, the document, the garage, Ethan at the kitchen table, Noah and Saturn. Barbara listened without interrupting once, which was a significant act of will for a woman who usually had opinions ready to deploy on a short timeline. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She said, "The most useful thing you do is send money," Barbara said. "Yes." "And what did you do?" "I stopped sending money," I said. "And what happened?" "My son came and sat at my kitchen table in the rain," I said, "and looked at me like I was his mother." Barbara was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "Gerald would be proud of you." Something happened in my chest. Not a crack more, like the giving way of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. I looked up at the desert sky, at the scatter of stars visible even through the ambient light of the city, and I thought about Gerald lying on a blanket in the backyard, pointing up at Orion. I thought about Noah finding Saturn. 3 rings on a clear night. "I think he would," I said. Barbara reached over and squeezed my hand, and we sat like that for a while, 2 sisters under the stars not talking, which is one of the best things you can do with someone who has known you your whole life. I flew home on a Sunday. Ethan picked me up from the airport. He was standing at arrivals when I came through, which I hadn't expected. I'd assumed he'd be curbside, the practical approach in and out. But he was there inside at the gate area in his coat, looking for my face in the crowd. When he saw me, he raised his hand. The simple gesture of it, just a hand. "I see you. I'm here." I walked toward my son. "Good trip?" he asked, taking my bag. "Very good," I said. "Your Aunt Barbara sends her love and a specific instruction that you call her more often." "She texts me every Sunday," he said. "She wants calls," I said. "She thinks texting is for cowards." He laughed. Real laugh, the one I knew. The one that sounded like his father. We walked to the car together. It was cold early December now, the specific cold that settles into a city in the weeks before Christmas gray, and biting and oddly clarifying. "Noah wants to know if he can come over next weekend," Ethan said. "Work on the telescope with you. He has a list of things he wants to find." "He has a list," I said. "He made a chart," Ethan said. "Color-coded. Rachel helped him laminate it." I stopped walking for just a second. Rachel had helped him laminate it. "Tell him yes," I said. "Tell him I'll have hot chocolate and we can go over the chart together." Ethan nodded. We got to the car. He put my bag in the trunk. I stood on the passenger side for a moment, looking at the parking garage ceiling, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. "Mom," Ethan said over the roof of the car. "Yes." "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on us." I thought about what to say to that. About how you don't give up on your children, that's not how it works, that the love doesn't go anywhere, even when the relationship needs to be reconstructed from the ground up. "That was never on the table," I said. He nodded. We got in the car and drove home through the December cold. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I watched the city pass by outside the window, my city, the one I'd lived in for 40 years, the one where I'd raised my son and buried my husband and cried more nights than I could count, and also laughed, also built a life, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, not arrival, not resolution, something better than both. The particular feeling of a door that has been locked for years creaking open at last, letting in the cold air and the light together, neither one arriving without the other. I let it in. Both of them. Noah arrived that Saturday with a laminated chart, a mechanical pencil, and the focused energy of a 10-year-old who has discovered a purpose. He walked through my front door, gave me a hug that was more collision than embrace, the specific kind of hug that children give when they have somewhere important to be, and the hug is a formality. They're willing to perform on the way there and immediately spread the chart on my kitchen table. "Okay, Grandma," he said, pulling out the mechanical pencil with ceremony. "I have 17 objects on the list. Mrs. Alderman said realistically I can find maybe 8 or 9 from a suburban location, but I think she's being conservative." I looked at the chart. It was meticulous. Color-coded by category planets in blue star clusters, in green nebulae in orange. Each object had a column for date, attempted date, found, and notes. The lamination was slightly crooked on the left side, which told me Noah had done it himself, and Rachel had let him. Something about that detail, Rachel letting him do it imperfectly, sat with me in a complicated way. "Mrs. Alderman might be right," I said, "but let's find out." Noah looked up from the chart with his grandfather's eyes, that particular focused gray that meant a decision had been made. "Grandpa Gerald found constellations without a telescope," he said. "We have a telescope. We should be able to find more." "That's extremely sound logic," I said. He nodded, satisfied, went back to the chart. Ethan was standing in my doorway, still in his coat, watching his son with an expression I recognized. It was the expression Gerald used to get watching Ethan do something unexpectedly competent, a particular mix of pride and something like relief, like the world was for a moment working correctly. "You want coffee?" I asked. "Please," he said. We left Noah at the table with his chart and went to the kitchen, and for a few minutes it was just coffee and the sound of Noah muttering to himself about Jupiter's moons, and it felt ordinary, in the best possible way, the ordinary that isn't ordinary at all when you understand how easily it can be lost. "Rachel wanted to come," Ethan said quietly, so Noah wouldn't hear. I turned from the coffee maker. "Why didn't she?" "She didn't know if you were ready for that." I thought about it. About Rachel helping Noah laminate the chart, about the clothing boxes she'd moved herself without being asked, about the silence on the phone after I told her what I'd heard, the specific silence of someone sitting with something true about themselves that they didn't yet know what to do with. "She can come next time," I said, "if she wants to." Ethan's shoulders did something not quite relaxing, more like resettling, like a weight had been redistributed. "I'll tell her," he said. We brought our coffee to the table where Noah was explaining to no one in particular that Saturn's rings were made of ice and rock and were roughly as thin as a 10-story building is tall when compared to their width, which he delivered as a devastating and personal affront to his expectations. "I thought they'd be thicker," he said. "The universe doesn't ask your opinion," I said. "It should," Noah said. I looked at Ethan over our coffee cups. He looked back, and for a second, just a flash of the real thing underneath all the complicated adult repair work we still had ahead of us. We were just a family sitting at a kitchen table on a December Saturday, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. December moved quickly, the way December always does, the days shortening until they're barely days at all, the weeks stacking up toward Christmas, with the specific urgency that makes you feel simultaneously rushed and nostalgic for something that hasn't ended yet. I was busy in a way I hadn't been in years. Real busy, not the anxious, reactive busy of being always available, but the full, intentional busy of a woman who has remembered she has a life. Linda and I had our lunch on Millbrook Avenue. We talked for 3 hours and closed the restaurant. The waiter brought the check twice before we actually touched it. We talked about our husbands, our children, the strange geography of being women in our 60s in a world that often forgot to look at us at all. Linda had her own version of the thing I'd lived through, different details, same essential shape, the slow erasure of self that happens when you pour everything outward and nothing back in. "Tom keeps asking where I've been," she said. "I told him I've been right here. He just stopped looking." "Did you?" I said. "Stop looking." She thought about it. "Not entirely," she said. "I kept a small piece, in here." She touched her chest. "Covered it up mostly, but I kept it." "So did I said. "I just forgot where I'd put it." We made plans to walk together on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Linda had been walking the same neighborhood loop for years, and I had been driving past her countless times without stopping. That stopped that day. I signed up for a ceramics class at the Community Arts Center, something I had wanted to do for years and always had a reason to defer. The class met on Wednesday evenings, 6 to 9, a small group of 8 or 9 people in a studio that smelled like clay and glaze, and the particular satisfaction of making something with your hands. My first piece was terrible, lopsided, too thin on one side, the rim uneven. The instructor, a young woman named Sasha, who had the patience of someone who had seen much worse, told me it had character. "It has a personality disorder," I said. She laughed. "That's ceramics," she said. "You learn by ruining things." I ruined 3 more bowls before I made one that held its shape all the way through the firing. I put it on my kitchen counter. I ate soup out of it every day for a week out of sheer satisfaction. Gerald would have found this extremely funny. He would have examined the bowl with great seriousness, turned it over, set it down, and said something like, "It's rustic," which was the word he used when he wanted to be kind about something that wasn't quite right. I told Linda about it during our Tuesday walk, and she laughed so hard she had to stop and catch her breath. This was my life in December, and it was good. It was genuinely, quietly, without apology good. 2 weeks before Christmas, Rachel called. Not Ethan. Rachel. Directly from her own phone at 10:15 on a Wednesday morning when I was drinking my coffee and reviewing a library book I'd been meaning to read for 6 months and had finally picked up. I looked at the screen for a moment before I answered. Not because I was going to ignore it, because I wanted to go into the conversation prepared, not armored, not defensive, but present. Myself. "Rachel," I said. "Margaret." A pause. Then, "Are you busy?" "Not particularly," I said. "What's on your mind?" Another pause longer, the kind that tells you someone has rehearsed what they want to say and is now deciding whether to say the rehearsed version or abandon it entirely for something closer to the truth. She abandoned it. "I've been trying to figure out how to call you for 3 weeks, she said. "I've started maybe 6 times. I kept deciding what I wanted to say and then taking it apart because it wasn't right." "Okay," I said. "I don't have a good version," she said. "I just have the honest one, and the honest one isn't particularly flattering." "The honest one is the only one I'm interested in," I said. I heard her take a breath. "I heard what I said, through the window. I know you were there. I knew it the moment you told me on the phone. I knew exactly which moment you meant and exactly what I'd said, and there was no version of it I could make sound like anything other than what it was." She stopped, started again. "I said it because I believed it. That's the part I've had to sit with. Not just that I said something thoughtless in a frustrated moment. I said it because on some level I had actually organized you that way in my mind, as a function, as something useful rather than someone. The directness of it stopped me. I had expected an apology. I had expected the managed, polished version of remorse that Rachel was entirely capable of producing. This was not that. "How long?" I asked. "How long had you been thinking of me that way?" A pause. "Longer than I'm comfortable admitting." "Try anyway," I said. "A few years?" she said. "Gradually. It wasn't I didn't wake up one day and decide you were just an ATM, Margaret. It happened slowly, the way things do, when no one ever says stop. Ethan didn't say stop. You didn't say stop. And She stopped again. "I'm not a person who stops herself easily when something is convenient." That was honest enough to be almost brutal. I sat with it. "I'm not going to excuse it," she said. "I'm not going to explain it into something smaller than it was. I treated you badly. I let you be treated badly. And I said something about you in your son's house in front of your son that you should never have had to hear. But I'm glad I heard it," I said, "because I would still be standing at that door." A long silence. "I know," Rachel said quietly. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay." "The things you said that day that I make it weird that people are uncomfortable, was that true? Did people feel that way?" This was the question I had been carrying for weeks. The one that woke me at 3 in the morning, sometimes the one that I had examined from every angle and could not put down. Not because the answer would change anything. I had made my decisions, and I stood by them, but because I needed to know the truth of what I had been walking into for 3 years, believing I was welcome. Rachel took longer with this one. "Ethan was never uncomfortable," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever I said, Ethan genuinely wanted you there. That wasn't something I should have characterized as everyone." Another pause. "I was uncomfortable, sometimes. But Margaret, I need to be honest, it wasn't really about you. It was about me. About feeling watched, maybe. Evaluated. Like I was always being assessed as a wife and a mother, and I was never quite—" She stopped. "Enough," I said quietly. "Yes," she said. "That's the word." I sat with that for a moment. With the unexpected weight of it, the realization that the woman who had made me feel unwelcome had been sitting in her own house feeling the same thing. Not the same cause, not the same justice, but the same feeling. "Rachel," I said slowly, "I never thought you weren't enough." "I know that now," she said. "I didn't know it then." "I should have said it," I said. "Instead of just showing up and giving things, I should have just said it." "I should have talked to Ethan instead of around you," she said. "I should have said I feel like I'm failing every time your mother comes over. Can we talk about that? Instead, I just—" She made a sound that was tired and rueful and human, built up a wall and put a price tag on the other side. Something I'd been holding, a specific tight thing somewhere under my sternum, loosened slightly. Not gone, not resolved, but loosened. "I'm not ready for everything to go back to normal," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to be who I was, the financial support that's done, Rachel. Not as punishment, because it was never healthy for any of us." "I know," she said. "Ethan and I have redone our budget, completely. It's an adjustment, but we're managing it." "Good," I said. "I'm glad. And she paused. "I'd like to try if you're willing, with you and me. Not pretending the last few years didn't happen, just trying to build something that isn't built on me ignoring who you are." I looked out my window at the December morning. Gray sky, bare trees. Linda would be at the corner in 20 minutes for our walk. "I'm willing," I said. "It'll take time." "I know. And Rachel, if you ever feel the way you were feeling again, like I'm making it weird, like you can't measure up, talk to me. Don't build a wall, just talk to me." A pause. "That's going to be hard for me," she said. "I know," I said. "Do it anyway." "Okay," she said, and then quieter. "Thank you for answering." "You're welcome," I said. We hung up. I sat at my table for a moment with the phone in my hand and the gray December light coming in and Gerald's photograph on the shelf, and I thought about what had just happened. Not the outcome, not the resolution, but the thing underneath it. The thing that Rachel had said without quite saying it. I felt like I was never enough. I had never once considered that the woman who had diminished me might have been living under her own version of the same sentence. It didn't excuse what she'd done. Let me be clear about that. Understanding someone's wound doesn't oblige you to let them wound you with it. But it changed the shape of the story, made it human, made it the kind of complicated, imperfect, real people mess that actual lives are made of, rather than the clean villain and victim narrative that's easier to carry, but never quite fits. I put the phone down, got my coat, met Linda at the corner. "You look like you've been thinking hard about something," she said, falling into step beside me. "I have," I said. "Good hard or bad hard?" "Just hard," I said. She nodded, accepted that. We walked. This was what I had been missing, I realized, for 3 years. Not just the walking or the company, the freedom to be in the middle of something without having to perform resolution. The freedom to say, just hard, and have that be enough. Christmas came the way it always does, too fast and all at once, with a kind of cheerful inevitability that doesn't leave much room for ambivalence. Ethan called 3 weeks before to ask about my plans. I told him about Barbara's invitation. She wanted me back in Phoenix. She and Carl were having 20 people, and the guest room was already made up. And she informed me by text, already purchased a very good bottle of wine specifically for me, and was not accepting no as an answer. "You're going to Phoenix again," Ethan said. He didn't say it with resentment, more like surprise, the adjusting surprise of someone recalibrating a picture they thought they knew. "I am," I said. "What about Christmas morning with Noah?" "What about it?" I said. "I'm flying on the 26th. Christmas morning I'll be right here." "Oh," he said. "Good, yeah, good." And then he said something he had not said in years, possibly ever, in exactly this way. "Can we come to you Christmas morning, Rachel and Noah and me? We can bring breakfast. We can come to you. Not are you coming over here. Not we'll see you sometime during the week. Not the assumed arrangement where my role was to show up and make myself useful in someone else's house. We can come to you." "Yes," I said, and kept the rest of what I was feeling out of my voice, because some things you don't need to explain. "I'd love that." They arrived at 9 on Christmas morning, Rachel carrying a bag from the bakery downtown, the good one on Fernwood Avenue, the one that made the brioche French toast that required advance ordering. Ethan had Noah on his back piggyback, which Noah was approximately 2 years too old for, and was enjoying with the specific joy of someone who knows they're getting away with something. They came in through the front door, and the house immediately had the quality I had forgotten it could have: full. Alive. The warm, chaotic fullness of people who belong to each other, moving through a space together. Noah slid off Ethan's back and went immediately to the telescope, which I had set up by the front window the night before, aimed at nothing in particular because it was daytime, but positioned like a promise. "Grandma," he said, "did you see the meteor shower last week?" "I did," I said. 3. "I saw 7, he said. "From my bedroom window. Mom let me stay up." He said it with the satisfaction of a person reporting a significant achievement. "Your mom is smarter than Mrs. Alderman," I said. Rachel laughed. It came out quickly natural and a little surprised, the laugh of someone who wasn't expecting to laugh, and then did. She caught my eye. I held it for a moment. We were not all the way there. We both knew it. But we were somewhere, and somewhere was a beginning. Kitchen, I said. Kitchen, she said. We made coffee together, really together, not the careful parallel working around each other that women do in kitchens when they don't quite trust the shared space yet. She found the mugs without asking. I knew she would. She'd been in my kitchen enough times over the years. I handed her the coffee beans, and she ground them without ceremony while I got out the French press, and we moved around each other the way people do when they've decided to be easy with each other, when the decision to be difficult is too expensive, and the space on the other side of it is worth crossing toward. He's happy, Rachel said, nodding toward the living room where Noah was explaining something earnestly to Ethan about declination coordinates. He's extraordinary, I said. He gets that from you, she said, simply, without performance. I looked at her. The focus, she said, the way he locks onto something and just goes. Ethan does it too, but with him it's more scattered. With Noah, it's like a laser. That's you. That's Gerald, I said. Maybe both, she said. We brought the coffee to the living room and sat, and Ethan read the label on the brioche bag out loud with great ceremony, and Noah negotiated aggressively for hot chocolate instead of juice. And I sat in my own living room in my own house on Christmas morning, surrounded by the people I loved, and thought, this is what I almost let become transactional. This exact thing. This ordinary, irreplaceable, perfect thing. I looked at Gerald's photograph on the shelf. I was still squinting into the sun at that camping trip. Still grinning. Merry Christmas, I told him silently, privately. I was almost certain I could hear him answer. The new year arrived, and with it something I had not anticipated, the phone call that changed everything I thought I understood about what I had survived. It was January the second week, that gray stretch after the holidays, when the world returns to itself and the specific loneliness of ordinary days reasserts itself. I had been back from Phoenix 10 days. The ceramics class had resumed. Linda and I were walking in the cold breath visible in the morning air, talking about nothing and everything. I was making dinner on a Thursday evening when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize, Virginia area code. I almost didn't answer. Then something instinct or just the particular mood of a quiet Thursday made me pick up. Is this Margaret Wilson? A woman's voice, professional, measured. It is, I said. Mrs. Wilson, my name is Donna Haynes. I'm a family therapist. I'm calling because I have a client I'm not able to tell you who gave me permission to contact you. They wanted me to reach out on their behalf. I put down the spoon I was holding. Okay, I said. My client has been working through some significant family patterns, Donna Haynes said carefully, and they've identified you as someone they've caused harm to. They would like the opportunity to speak with you on your terms, in a setting you're comfortable with at whatever pace you choose, but only if you're willing. I stood in my kitchen with the phone to my ear and looked at Gerald's photograph and had a feeling I didn't yet have a name for. Can you tell me anything about this person? I asked. Only what they've given me permission to share, she said. They're someone close to you, and they've been doing significant work. That's all I can tell you. Someone close to me, not Ethan. Ethan and I had found our way back to each other slowly, imperfectly, truly. Not Noah, who was 10, and not in family therapy. Not Rachel, or so I assumed, because Rachel and I had had our own conversation, and it had felt, if not complete, then at least direct, or so I had thought. I'll think about it, I said. Can I call you back? Of course, she said. There's no pressure and no timeline. She gave me her number. I wrote it on the notepad beside the stove, the one I'd kept there for 30 years for exactly this kind of thing, grocery lists and phone numbers, and Gerald's notes about what needed fixing. I stared at it for a long time. Someone close to you. I called Linda, not because she could solve it, she couldn't, but because Linda was exactly the kind of friend who could sit with you inside a question without needing to turn it into an answer prematurely. A therapist called you, she said. On behalf of a client who won't identify themselves, I said. But who says they've hurt you? Yes. And you don't know who it is? I have a guess, I said. Linda was quiet for a moment. Rachel, she said. Maybe, I said. Or Ethan, or someone I'm not even considering. What does your gut say? My gut says Rachel, I said. But my gut also said for 3 years that everything was fine, so I'm not entirely trusting it. What are you going to do? I thought about the notepad, the number, the particular weight of significant work, the specific courage it would take to reach out to someone you've hurt, not to perform remorse, not to manage the situation, but to do it through a therapist. Formally, with structure and accountability. That was not a small thing. I think I'm going to call her back, I said. I think I'm going to agree to meet. Are you sure? No, I said, but I think not sure is the right feeling for this. Linda made a sound that meant she agreed and was glad I had found my way there without her having to say it. Let me know, she said. I will, I said. I hung up, looked at the number on the notepad, made myself finish cooking dinner first because I had learned over the last 3 months that I was better at hard things when I had eaten. Then I picked up the phone and called Donna Haynes back. The meeting was set for a Saturday morning 2 weeks out at Donna Haynes's office on the east side of the city, neutral territory, her suggestion which I appreciated. I would come at 10. Her client would be there. It would be a facilitated conversation, which meant Donna would be in the room and at any point I could choose to stop. I agreed to all of it. I did not sleep particularly well for the 2 weeks in between. Not from dread from the particular alertness of someone moving towards something important, the body's way of preparing itself for what the mind has already decided to face. Ethan noticed on one of his Wednesday calls. You seem distracted, he said. Something on my mind, I said. Anything you want to talk about? Not yet, I said. Soon. I didn't push. That was new, the not pushing, the respecting of a closed door. 3 months ago, Ethan would have either not noticed or noticed and handled it poorly. Now he noticed and held the space. Gerald would have called it growth. I drove to Donna Haynes's office on a Saturday morning in late January. Cold, dry, bright, the kind of January day that is too clear for its own temperature. I sat in the parking lot for 3 minutes, not from hesitation, but from the need to be entirely present before I walked in. Then I walked in. Donna Haynes was exactly what you'd expect from a voice that measured, and professional 50s calm the specific stillness of someone who has spent decades in rooms with people saying hard things and has learned how to hold those rooms without filling them. She brought me into the office and offered me water and gestured to a chair and said, "Before she comes in, do you have any questions?" She. So it was a woman. My gut had been right. "No," I said. "I think I'm ready." Donna nodded, stood, and went to the door. And Rachel walked in. She looked different, not dramatically, not the way people look in movies after a transformation obvious and lit from within. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been doing hard work and not sleeping enough because of it. Her posture was different, less armored, less the precise containment I had associated with her for 21 years. She looked like herself with fewer walls around her. She sat down across from me. We looked at each other. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure I would either," I said. "I'm here." She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at me. "I want to start by saying that I don't expect this to fix everything. I know that's not how it works. I've been in therapy long enough to know that a single conversation doesn't undo years." She paused. "But I needed you to see that I was doing actual work, not just saying the right things on the phone." "How long have you been seeing Donna?" I said. 8 weeks, Rachel said. "I started 3 days after the garage, after you moved everything out." She looked at me steadily. "I was furious at first. I want to be honest about that. I was furious and I thought you were being cruel, and I went home that night and said things to Ethan that I'm not proud of." "What kind of things?" I said. I needed to know. Not from masochism, from the same instinct that had made me tally the bank statements. The need to see the full picture, however unflattering. Rachel's jaw tightened slightly. Then she answered, "I called you controlling. I said you were doing it to punish us. I said the document was manipulative and the garage was vindictive, and you'd always had a problem letting Ethan live his own life." She kept her eyes on mine. "I said it all as if I believed it. The truth is, I said it because I was frightened." "Of what?" I said. "Of what the numbers meant about me," she said. "About who I had become. Because the moment you showed us that document, I couldn't pretend I hadn't known. I'd told myself I hadn't known, but seeing it laid out like that..." She stopped. I knew. I knew what was happening, and I called it different things in my own head so I could keep accepting it. Donna said quietly, "Rachel, tell Margaret what you told me in session, about what you called it." Rachel took a breath. "I called it your way of being involved," she said. "I told myself that you liked giving, that it was how you expressed love, and who was I to take that away from you? I made it benevolent, in my head, so I didn't have to look at what it actually was, which was that I was letting you fund a lifestyle we couldn't afford and telling myself it was your choice. The room was very quiet. That's more honest than I expected, I said. I'm tired of being less honest than the situation deserves, Rachel said. It's exhausting, and it hasn't gotten me anything I actually wanted. What did you actually want? I asked. In those years, what were you trying to build? She thought about it for a long time, long enough that the question had weight in the room, had presence, wasn't going to be answered quickly. A good life for Noah, she said finally. A marriage that felt secure, a home I was proud of. She paused. And somewhere in there, a relationship with you that didn't make me feel like I was failing. You were building those things with my money, I said, and calling it success. Yes, she said, I was. And the relationship with me that didn't make you feel like you were failing, how did using me financially help with that? It didn't, she said. It made it worse. Every time you gave us something, I felt two things at once, grateful and ashamed. And shame doesn't sit still, it turns into resentment. And resentment looks for somewhere to land. She looked at me. It landed on you, and that is so deeply unfair I don't have words for it. I sat with that, with the particular sad logic of it, the way shame unaddressed curdles into something ugly and redirects itself at the wrong target. I had known somewhere that Rachel's feelings about me were complicated. I hadn't known how they'd gotten that way. I want to say something, I said, and I want you to just hear it, not respond. Just hear it. Rachel nodded. I don't think you're a bad person, I said. I think you're someone who learned to take what was offered and not ask hard questions about it. And I think you were carrying something, this feeling of not being enough that you never talked to me about, and so it sat there and grew, and eventually it came out through a window on a Thursday afternoon. I looked at her. I'm not going to pretend the last 3 years didn't happen, but I'm also not going to pretend that I understand now how they happened and that understanding changes something. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Does it change enough? She asked. Her voice was careful, not calculating careful. There's a difference, and I was beginning to be able to tell them apart. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but it changes the starting point. Donna said, Rachel, is there anything else you wanted Margaret to know? Rachel looked at her hands again, then back at me. Noah loves you, she said, completely unconditionally, in the way that kids love grandparents when the grandparent has really shown up for them. I have watched that kid light up every single time you walk into a room for 10 years. She paused. That's not something you can fake, and it's not something I did or gave him. That's between you and him. I want you to know that I see it, and I'm not going to be the thing that stands between them. My throat tightened. Thank you, I said, and meant it entirely. We stayed in that room for 90 minutes. Not all of it was difficult. Some of it was surprisingly ordinary. Two women talking about Noah's chart and Ethan's habit of leaving cabinet doors open, and the ceramics class that Rachel said Noah had told her about and that she'd quietly looked up online. Ordinary things. The small connective tissue of shared life. When I drove home, I sat in my car in the driveway for a moment before going inside, not processing, just feeling, letting the day land. It was not a resolution. It was not the moment where everything clicked into place and became simple. Life does not offer those moments often, and when it does, they're usually smaller than you expected. What it was real, and real was more than I'd had before. I went inside, put the kettle on, and called Barbara. You went, Barbara said before I'd said anything except hello. How did you know? I said. Because you sound like someone who just did something hard and survived it, she said. How are you? I'm okay, I said. And then I said the fuller truth. I'm more okay than I thought I'd be. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. February arrived, and with it 2 things I hadn't planned on. The first was a letter, an actual letter paper envelope stamp handwriting, left in my mailbox on a Wednesday afternoon. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope before I opened it because I had seen it on every labeled storage box that had spent 3 years in my garage. Rachel's handwriting. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. It was 3 pages in Rachel's precise, slightly forward-leaning script. I won't repeat all of it. Some things belong to the people they were written for, and letters like this one are not meant to be transcribed. But I will tell you what it was. It was not an apology. It was beyond an apology. An apology is a moment, a contained thing. This was an accounting a full, clear-eyed, honest accounting of who Rachel had been in the years of our relationship and why and what she was trying to become. She wrote about her own childhood things I hadn't known, things that explained without excusing the architecture of a person who learned early that love was conditional and security was earned, and you should take what was available before it was withdrawn. She wrote about the moment she had decided somewhere in the second year of knowing me that I was safe to take from because I would never leave. She wrote about what it had felt like to hear herself read in that document, to see herself clearly, perhaps for the first time in the record of what she had allowed and accepted and organized her life around. And at the end of the third page, she wrote, "I don't know if we can be family in the real sense, but I would like to try to be two women who respect each other. That's what I'm working toward. I hope you'll tell me if I miss the mark." I read it 3 times. Then I did something I had not planned to do. I wrote back. 4 pages my own handwriting, which Gerald always said was better than it had any right to be for someone who'd spent 30 years typing. I wrote about the years of giving and what I had been trying to buy with them. I wrote about Gerald and the grief that had made me so desperate to be needed. I wrote about the woman I had been before all of it, the one who had opinions and plans and took ceramics classes and walked on Tuesday mornings and had friends she actually saw. And I wrote, "I think two women who respect each other is exactly the right place to start. I'll meet you there." I sealed it and walked it to her mailbox myself. She texted me an hour later, just 2 words. "Thank you." I texted back 3, "See you soon." The second thing February brought was something I had not anticipated from any direction. Ethan called on a Tuesday evening, and his voice had the quality I now recognized as the precursor to something important, that slightly too controlled steadiness people use when they're trying not to get ahead of themselves. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me," I said. "Rachel and I have been talking," he said, "about a lot of things. Finances, obviously, the budget, but also about the future, about what we want, about what kind of family we want to be." "Okay," I said. We've been thinking about getting a smaller house," he said. "Downsizing, selling the Clover Ridge place and getting something that actually fits what we can actually afford instead of what we've been augmenting." He said the last word carefully, the word of someone choosing precision over comfort. "And we found something. It's smaller. It needs work, but it's ours." He was quiet for a moment. "I wanted you to know," he said, "because it's a big change, and because because everything that's happened in the last few months made it possible, made it necessary maybe, made it so I could finally look at what we'd built and see it clearly." "That's brave," I said. "That's genuinely brave, Ethan." "It doesn't feel brave," he said. "It feels late." "Late is still not never," I said. He was quiet. "Are you happy?" I asked. "About the house." And he said something then that I will keep with me for the rest of my life. He said, "Mom, I'm happy in a way that doesn't require me to be performing for anyone. I didn't know that was possible, actually. I think I'd been performing for so long I forgot there was a difference." I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, sitting outside a door believing that giving was the same as belonging, performing love because I'd forgotten how to just have it. "I know exactly what you mean," I said. "I know you do," he said. We talked for another hour, about the house, about Noah's chart. He'd found 6 of his 17 objects, and was treating the remaining 11 as a personal challenge from the universe about Gerald's workbench, which Ethan had asked carefully if he could have when they moved, if I was willing to part with it, and which I told him yes, absolutely, that it was meant to be used, and Gerald would have agreed. When we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of my house, my kitchen, my evening, my quiet, the particular quality of silence that belongs to a person who has chosen it rather than had it chosen for them. I thought about the woman who had stood at a pale blue door in October, holding a handmade telescope, and heard 8 words that rearranged her world. I thought about the 11 minutes, the steady hands, the kettle. I thought about Noah finding Saturn, 3 rings on a clear night. I thought about Gerald lying on a blanket in the backyard pointing up, and I thought this is what happens when you stop performing your own life and start actually living it. The people around you have to figure out how to be real too. Some of them manage it. Some of them surprise you entirely. Some of them laminate a star chart and bring you brioche on Christmas morning and text, "Thank you," in the space where a wall used to be. It is not a perfect story. No real story is, but it is mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I am living it on my own terms. The new house was on Birchwood Street, 11 minutes from mine. Ethan sent me the listing on a Thursday morning. No message, just the link, which was its own kind of communication. The old Ethan would have called first, managed my reaction before I'd even had one cushioned every edge. This Ethan sent the link and let me look and trusted me to respond like an adult. I clicked it. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard with a fence that needed painting, original hardwood floors that someone had covered with carpet, and that Ethan, in a follow-up text 30 seconds later, said he planned to restore himself. A basement with enough space for a workbench. That last detail stopped me. A basement with enough space for a workbench. I sat with the listing open on my laptop, and I thought about Gerald's workbench, the one I'd said Ethan could have, the one that had sat in my garage under 3 years of other people's things, and now stood cleared and clean against the wall waiting. And I thought about Ethan saying he wanted to restore the floors himself, and I thought about a man who had spent years having things done for him by other people's money, learning to use his hands. I texted back, "It has good bones. The backyard fence is an easy fix." He replied in under a minute, "I know, I'm going to paint it myself." 3 months ago, that sentence would have been followed by, "Can you help with the cost?" Now it stood alone, clean, a statement of intention requiring nothing from me except acknowledgement. I replied, Gerald would approve. He sent back a single thumbs up, which is the way 41-year-old men express things they don't have words for. I understood completely. They made an offer that same afternoon. It was accepted by Friday evening. Ethan called me from the driveway of the new house after signing the papers, standing outside in the February cold, and his voice had the quality of someone who has just done something genuinely difficult and is still slightly surprised to find themselves on the other side of it. "We own it," he said. "How does it feel?" I asked. "Terrifying," he said. "Good, both at the same time." "That's exactly how it's supposed to feel," I said. He laughed, the real laugh, the Gerald laugh, and I held the phone and listened to it and thought, this is what I was trying to preserve all along. Not the arrangement, not the financial architecture. This, the sound of my son genuinely present in his own life. "Mom," he said. "Yes. Thank you for not letting us keep going." I didn't say anything for a moment, because what he was thanking me for was an act I had performed out of self-preservation, not strategy. I had not pulled away to save them. I had pulled away to save myself, and the saving of them had been a consequence unexpected and profound, but a consequence nonetheless. "I didn't do it for you," I said honestly. "I did it for me, but I'm glad it helped." A pause. "I know," he said. "That's kind of the point, isn't it?" It was. It absolutely was. I let him get back to Rachel and Noah, who were apparently inside the empty house eating takeout on the floor, in lieu of furniture, which Noah had declared the greatest dinner of his life. I hung up, put on my coat, and walked down to the corner and back in the February cold, just to feel myself in my own body, in my own life, moving at my own pace. The cold was sharp, the street was quiet. The sky was the deep winter blue of early evening, and the first star, Venus probably, or maybe Jupiter. I had been learning the difference since Noah and his chart had started showing up on my doorstep, was visible low in the west. I stood on the corner and looked at it. Noah would know exactly what it was. I went home and called him. "Venus," he said, before I'd finished describing its position. "It's always the brightest one low in the west this time of year. Jupiter is higher and slightly more white." A pause. "Did you know Venus rotates backward compared to most planets?" "I did not know that," I said. "It rotates so slowly that a day on Venus is longer than its year," he said. "That's technically true." "Noah," I said, "how do you know these things?" "Books," he said with the complete confidence of a child who has not yet learned to be embarrassed by knowing things. "And Grandpa Gerald's encyclopedia. Dad found it in a box in the basement." I stopped. "Gerald's encyclopedia," I said. "The big green ones," Noah said. "There are 23 of them. Did you know he had them? Dad said he forgot they were there." Gerald's encyclopedias. I knew exactly which ones the Complete World book set he'd bought in 1987, the year before Ethan was born, because Gerald had believed firmly and without apology that a house with a child in it required physical reference books. He'd read to Ethan from them. He'd used them himself for 30 years for the specific pleasure of holding information in his hands rather than finding it on a screen. I had not known Ethan still had them. "Tell your dad to keep them somewhere safe," I said. My voice came out slightly different than I intended, fuller, slower. "They're in a box in my room," Noah said. I've been reading the A and B volumes. Did you know there's a whole section on astronomy? Of course there is, I said. Your grandfather made sure of it. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, Grandma, do you think Grandpa Gerald would have liked me? The question landed like something dropped from a height. Not because it was unexpected, children. Ask these questions, the sincere metaphysical ones that adults have learned to paper over with avoidance, but because of how simply and directly Noah asked it, as though the answer genuinely mattered, and he was not afraid to find out what it was. Noah, I said, your grandfather would have been absolutely crazy about you. How do you know? Because you read encyclopedias for fun, I said. Because you made a laminated chart. Because you cried when you found Saturn. I paused. And because you just called your grandmother to ask her about a star instead of looking it up yourself. Gerald believed that some answers were better coming from a person. A long pause. I do too, Noah said. I held the phone very carefully, the way you hold things that might break if you're not paying attention. I know you do, I said. We talked for 20 more minutes about Venus and the retrograde rotation of planets and whether the encyclopedias section on Mars was still accurate, given that several rovers had been sent there since 1987. Noah's conclusion was that Gerald's books were essential historical documents and the new information should be added in the margins in pencil, which was such a specific and perfect solution that I told him so, and he sounded very satisfied. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with the quiet and the dark, and Gerald's photograph, and the full, complicated feeling of a life that was remaking itself into something true. March came in like it always does, loudly with false promises of warmth that it then immediately withdrew. But the light was changing, and light changing means something has shifted even when the cold insists otherwise. I had found a rhythm. Mornings with Linda, ceramics on Wednesdays, library on Fridays. I had volunteered to read to the after-school program, which I'd been meaning to do for years, and had somehow never gotten around to. Noah came over most Saturdays, sometimes with Ethan, sometimes with Rachel, once with both of them, which had a particular quality. The four of us moving around my kitchen together, bumping into each other. The ordinary choreography of people who are learning to share space without the weight of old arrangements pressing down on everything. Rachel and I were careful with each other, not cold careful, the kind of careful that means you know the terrain has changed and you're choosing your footing deliberately rather than stumbling forward on habit. She would arrive and say, "What can I do?" And I would give her something real to do, not a performance task, and she would do it without needing to make it mean more than it was. Small things. But small things done consistently are not small at all. One Saturday in March, Rachel stayed after Ethan took Noah home early. Noah had a birthday party at a friend's house, and Ethan had a work call he'd pushed twice already and couldn't push again. Rachel stayed to help me carry some boxes from the second bedroom to the basement I was reorganizing, which had become a kind of ongoing project since the garage clearing, a reclaiming of space that was also a reclaiming of self. We carried boxes, we made tea, we sat at my kitchen table, and for the first time since the parking lot of Donna Haynes's office, we talked without a facilitator, without structure, without the scaffolding of formal reconciliation. Just two women at a kitchen table figuring out how to know each other. She told me things I hadn't known. About her mother, difficult, critical, the kind of mother who expressed love through a constant low-grade assessment of your performance. About growing up feeling like she was always one failure away from losing the warmth in the room. About what it meant to her at 28 to meet Ethan, who was steady and uncritical, and who came with a mother who showed up and gave things freely, and how that dynamic, the giving, the unconditionality of it, had felt initially like the safest thing in the world. And then over time, she said, the safe thing started to feel like a judgment. Because you couldn't match it, I said. Because I couldn't match it, she said. And because I didn't want to be the person who was always receiving and never contributing. But instead of doing something about that feeling, I converted it. Into resentment, I said. Into resentment, she said. Directed at you, which was easier than being honest with myself about what I was actually ashamed of. I thought about my own shame. The 3 years of giving so I wouldn't have to sit with the grief of being irrelevant. The way I had converted my own wound into something that looked like generosity, but was really an elaborate avoidance. We were both running from something, I said. Yes, she said. We just crashed into each other while we were doing it. Something shifted between us at that table. Not dramatically, not the movie version of two women reaching across and clasping hands in the sunlight. More like the specific feeling of a room that has been cleared of furniture you thought you needed. Spacious and slightly strange and full of possibility. "Can I say something that might land badly?" Rachel said. "Say it," I said. "I think Ethan and I needed this." She held my gaze. "I think we were building a life that was comfortable and accelerating and completely unsustainable, and we would not have stopped on our own. We would have kept going, kept spending, kept depending, kept not looking at each other honestly until it collapsed from the inside in some way that was much worse than this." She paused. "I'm not saying what you did was painless. It wasn't. It was one of the hardest months of my life. But I think it was also necessary, in the way that a hard frost is necessary. Everything has to die back before it can grow right. I had not expected that. I had expected effort and sincerity and the ongoing work of repair. I had not expected to hear Rachel articulate something I had barely been able to articulate to myself. "Ethan said something like that too," I said, "a while back." "He's been thinking," Rachel said, "more than he lets on." A small smile, the real one, not the composed one. "He's been reading too, actually. Self-help. Don't tell him I told you." "Your secret is safe," I said. She laughed, and I laughed, and the room felt lighter than it had in 21 years of knowing each other. Then came the thing I had not seen coming. The twist that arrived not from drama, but from an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of day that doesn't announce itself as important until you're already in the middle of it and realize everything has changed. I was at the library, the after-school reading session, second Tuesday of March. 8 children, ages 6 to 9, arranged in a semicircle of small chairs, listening to me read from a book about a girl who plants a garden in an unlikely place and watches it become something extraordinary. The children were at varying stages of attention, which is the natural condition of children between the ages of 6 and 9, and I had learned to read to the ones who were listening and trust that the ones who weren't would circle back. I was reading. The room was warm. Outside, the March cold was making its last argument. My phone buzzed in my bag. I ignored it. It buzzed again, then a third time, after the session when the children had been collected by their parents and the room was quiet. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, not Virginia area code this time local, and a voicemail. I pressed play. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Dr. Patricia Sung at Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling regarding your son, Ethan Wilson. He was brought in about an hour ago following an accident at a work site. He is stable and conscious and asking for you. Please call us back or come directly to the emergency department. Ask for me at the desk." The library was empty. I stood between the shelves of picture books, and I heard the message twice to make sure I had heard it correctly, and then I called the number back, and a nurse told me he was stable, he was awake, he had a broken left arm and 2 cracked ribs and a laceration on his forearm that had required stitches, but he was conscious and alert and stable. And I said I was on my way and hung up and walked to my car with my coat half on keys already out. I drove to Mercy General in 11 minutes, which was a 4-minute improvement on the actual drive time, and I will not specify how. At the emergency department desk, I gave my name and asked for Dr. Sung and was taken back through the double doors and down a corridor to a bay separated from the others by a curtain, and I pushed through the curtain and Ethan was there. I was propped up on a gurney left arm in a temporary splint, a bandage on his forearm looking simultaneously terrible and sheepish in the specific way of people who have injured themselves, doing something they know could have been done more carefully. Rachel was beside him, sitting in the plastic chair with Noah's laminated star chart in her lap, which she'd apparently grabbed from her bag without thinking when she rushed out and then been unable to put down because her hands needed something to hold. She looked up when I came in. Her eyes were red. "He's okay," she said immediately. "He's okay." "I know," I said. "They told me." I went to the other side of the gurney, looked at my son. His face was pale but oriented. He was there behind his eyes, all of him. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi," I said. "I know," he said. "You don't know what I'm going to say." "You're going to say I should have been wearing better safety gear," he said. "I wasn't going to say that," I said. "I was going to say you scared me." Something in his face shifted. The sheepishness dropped away, and what was underneath was something younger and more real. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." I reached over and took his right hand, the uninjured one, and held it, not saying anything, Not performing comfort, just holding his hand the way I had held it when he was small and the world was frightening and I was the person who could make it less so by simply being there. We stayed like that for a moment. Rachel watched us and said nothing, which was exactly right. Then Ethan said, "The scaffold bracket failed. It wasn't carelessness. The bracket failed." "I know," I said. "That's for workers' comp and the site manager. Right now you just need to stay still." "I fell about 8 feet," he said. "Ethan," I said. "I know." 8 feet, I said. "I know, Mom." I squeezed his hand and looked at the ceiling for a moment, which is what you do when you need to regulate something before it becomes the wrong kind of visible. Rachel said quietly, "He called you first." I looked at her. "When he could make calls from the ambulance, he called you first." She said it simply without layering anything onto it, just offering me the fact. Before he called me, actually. I called him back 2 seconds later, so it was almost simultaneous, but she looked at Ethan with an expression that was fond and wry and honestly completely herself. "He called his mother first." Ethan said, "To be fair, I was concussed." "You were not concussed," Rachel said. "The doctor was very clear about that." "I might have been mildly concussed." "Ethan, I panicked," he said simply, "and I called the person I call when I panic." He looked at me. Is that okay?" "You're asking me if it's okay that you called your mother when you were scared," I said. "Yeah." "Ethan," I said, "that is the most okay thing you have ever done." Rachel laughed, a wet, relieved sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, the specific release of someone who has been very frightened for several hours and has finally found a moment to let it out. She covered her mouth with her hand and then lowered it and said, "Sorry, I've been holding that in." "Don't hold it in," I said. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm fine now. It was just a very long 2 hours." I looked at her across Ethan's gurney, at the red-rimmed eyes and the laminated star chart still in her lap, and the posture of a woman who had rushed to a hospital and sat beside her husband and been very frightened and held herself together with considerable effort. "You did good," I said. She looked at me. "I didn't do anything." "You were here," I said. "That's not nothing." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at the chart in her lap and straightened it unnecessarily, the gesture of someone handling an emotion they don't quite have words for. We stayed at the hospital for 3 more hours. I did not leave. Nobody asked me to. Nobody suggested I wait in the family room or get out of the way, or that my presence was anything other than exactly where it belonged. I sat in the chair on Ethan's right side while Rachel sat on his left, and we waited together for the final X-ray results and the discharge paperwork and the prescription for pain medication and the instructions about the ribs and the follow-up appointment with the orthopedic specialist. When the paperwork was done, Ethan looked at me and said, "Can you—" He stopped, started again. "Would you come to the house tonight? Rachel and I would—" Another stop. "Yes," I said, before he finished. "Yes, absolutely." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," I said. "I want to." And that was the difference. That was the whole enormous difference contained in 4 words. I want to. Not I feel obligated. Not what kind of mother would say no. Not I'll feel guilty if I don't. I want to. Free and clear and mine. Rachel was already gathering their things. She looked up and said, "I'll make dinner. Nothing complicated. Just something warm." "I'll bring wine," I said. "I'll be the one with the broken arm," Ethan said, doing nothing at all. "You'll supervise," Rachel said. "I'm an excellent supervisor," Ethan said. I helped him off the gurney. He was stiff and uncomfortable and significantly less invincible than he'd been that morning, which was a reminder neither of us needed articulated. I handed him his jacket and he put it on one-armed without complaint, and we walked out through the emergency department together, the 3 of us, into the March evening air. The cold hit after the warmth of the hospital. Ethan winced slightly. I put my hand briefly on his back, not holding just contact, just there. And then we were at the cars, and Rachel was unlocking the passenger door for him, and I was walking to my own car, and it was ordinary. It was just 3 people in a hospital parking lot after a frightening day going home. Ordinary. I had never been so grateful for ordinary in my life. I stayed at their house until 10. They were renting temporarily between the sale of Clover Ridge and the closing on Birchwood. They'd taken a short-term lease on a furnished apartment that was small and impersonal, and that Noah had christened the submarine, which stuck immediately. The submarine was crowded with 4 people in it, the kitchen barely large enough for 2, and Rachel and I made pasta and salad and garlic bread in it with the careful coordination of people who are working in genuinely insufficient space and have decided to find it funny rather than frustrating. We bumped into each other twice. The second time, reaching for the same cabinet handle, we both started laughing at the same moment, and Rachel said, "This kitchen is a crime," and I said Gerald would have fixed it in a weekend. And Rachel said, "Can I tell you something? Ethan has been watching YouTube tutorials about cabinet installation." I stopped. "Ethan." "YouTube tutorials," she said. 3 weeks of them. He's been taking notes." "Gerald's son," I said. "Late bloomer," she said, "but genuinely motivated." From the couch, Ethan called, "I can hear you." "We know," Rachel and I said simultaneously. We looked at each other. It was a small moment, one of those moments that doesn't mean anything on its own and means everything in context. The context being 21 years of not quite getting there and the last 6 months of hard, imperfect, genuine work. Rachel turned back to the pasta. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "I wanted to be here," I said. "I know," she said. "That's what I'm thanking you for." After dinner, Noah showed Ethan the constellation he'd been tracking on the chart, Leo, which was visible that week in the eastern sky, and then fell asleep on the couch at 8:30 in the way that children fall asleep completely and without negotiation, still in his shoes. Ethan's pain medication had made him drowsy, and by 9 he was horizontal on the other end of the couch, one arm in the splint, the other thrown over his eyes. Rachel and I cleaned up in the small kitchen, quietly so as not to wake them. She washed. I dried. We didn't talk much, just moved around each other in the small space, and it was comfortable in a way I hadn't anticipated. The comfortable that comes from having done the hard work and being on the other side of it. Not finished, you're never finished, but through. Before I left, I stood at the couch and looked at my son and my grandson, both asleep, both completely present in the way that sleeping people are unguarded and real. Noah's chart was on the coffee table. 16 objects, 14 still unchecked. I thought about Gerald lying on a blanket in the backyard. I thought about Jupiter's moons. I thought about a 10-year-old boy crying because he found Saturn. I pulled the throw blanket from the back of the couch and covered Noah's feet without waking him, and then I got my coat and Rachel walked me to the door, and we stood in the doorway for a moment. "He's going to be okay," I said, "about Ethan." "I know," she said. "The ribs take longer than people expect," I said. 3-4 weeks. Don't let him push it." "He'll push it," she said. "I know," I said. "Push back." She nodded. "Rachel," I said. "Yeah. You did really well today. In that hospital, you were steady." She looked at me for a moment. "I learned it somewhere," she said. I wasn't sure I understood what she meant until I was in my car driving home, and then I understood entirely. April arrived, and with it finally actual warmth, the kind that stays. The Birchwood house closed on the 1st of April. Ethan's ribs were healing, his arm was out of the splint and into a lighter brace, and he had spent the interim period watching approximately 47 more YouTube tutorials and writing lists of everything he planned to do to the house in order of priority. The list was 9 pages. Rachel photographed it and sent it to me with the caption, "He made it in a spreadsheet first and then printed it out. Gerald's son." I framed the message on my phone, not literally, but almost. Moving day was a Saturday. I arrived at 8 with coffee and a box of pastries from the bakery on Fernwood Avenue because some traditions are worth starting right. Ethan's friend Marcus was there, and 2 guys from his office, and between the 5 of us and Rachel and Noah, who contributed mostly commentary, and one genuinely impressive feat of carrying a box that was clearly too heavy for him, that nobody stopped because his face was so determined the truck was unloaded by noon. Gerald's workbench came off the truck last. Ethan and Marcus carried it down to the basement. I watched from the top of the stairs as they maneuvered it through the doorway, and I heard Ethan say something to Marcus that I couldn't make out, and Marcus laugh, and then the solid sound of the workbench being set against the wall. When Ethan came back upstairs, there was something on his face that I recognized, the look Gerald used to get after finishing something, a project, a repair, anything that involved his hands, the particular satisfaction of having made something real. "It fits perfectly," he said. "Of course it does," I said. "Gerald's things always fit." He looked at me. Then he hugged me carefully because of the ribs, and it was a real hug, the non-perfunctory kind, the kind that means exactly what it looks like. "Thank you," he said. "For everything, all of it, even the hard parts." Especially the hard parts, I said. He pulled back and looked at me and smiled, and he was so fully himself, so genuinely present in his own face, that I had to look away for a second to manage it. Noah shot past us, carrying his encyclopedias 2 at a time, heading for his new room, narrating his plan for their arrangement to no one in particular. AD on the bottom shelf, he was saying, EL in the middle, MZ on top, and the astronomy volumes within easy reach, because statistically I use those most. Noah, I called. He stopped, looked back. Your grandfather arranged his exactly the same way, I said. Noah stared at me for a moment. Then he turned back around and kept walking, but slowly, thoughtfully, the way you walk when you've been given something to carry that you want to hold carefully. I stood in the hallway of the new house with coffee in my hand and the sounds of moving and unpacking and arguing about furniture placement coming from every direction, and I thought, this is what I nearly paid for with my silence. This ordinary Saturday. This house with good bones and a fence that needs painting and a basement workbench and a boy arranging encyclopedias by the same logic as his grandfather. You can't buy this with money. You can only get here by telling the truth. 2 weeks after the move, I got a text from a number I almost didn't recognize. Then I looked at it again. It was Rachel's mother, Sandra, a woman I had met 3 times over 21 years, always briefly, always at a polite distance. She and Rachel had a complicated relationship. Rachel had told me some of it in that kitchen conversation, enough to sketch the shape of it. The text read, Margaret, this is Sandra Delaney. Rachel gave me your number. She said I should reach out. I understand you and Rachel have been working some things out. I wondered if we might talk sometime. No pressure. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I called Ethan. Did you know about this? I asked. She mentioned it, he said carefully. Rachel's been talking to her mother more, since the therapy. Apparently Sandra reached out wanting to understand some things. And she reached out to me, I said. Rachel thought it might help, he said. Both of you, but only if you want to. No obligation. No obligation. I had been hearing those words differently lately. They used to mean you don't have to, but you should. Now they meant exactly what they said. No obligation, just a choice. I sat with Sandra's text for 2 days. I thought about Rachel in my kitchen, talking about a mother who expressed love as assessment. I thought about the chain of women passing their wounds forward, Sandra to Rachel almost to Noah, almost all the way before something stopped it. Before a Thursday in October, and 8 words through an open window stopped it. I thought about Gerald saying some things you fix yourself, and some things you have to let other people fix, and the wisdom is knowing which is which. On the 3rd day, I texted Sandra back. Sandra, I'd be glad to talk. I know a good bakery on Fernwood Avenue. Let me know when works for you. She replied within the hour. Thursday at 10. Thank you, Margaret. I put the phone down and made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table in the April morning light and looked at Gerald's photograph and thought about chains, about how long they run, about the specific courage it takes to be the link that refuses to pass the damage forward. Rachel had done that. In her way, imperfectly, painfully, after years of doing the opposite, Rachel had started to be that link. And maybe Sandra, in her own way, was trying to start. Thursday was 4 days away. I was ready. I want to tell you what I had learned by then. Not the lessons that wrap things up cleanly. Life doesn't give you those, and I don't trust anyone who says it does. The real ones, the ones you earn by surviving something. The first thing I learned was about the difference between love and fear wearing love's clothing. I had given for years from a place of fear of irrelevance, fear of grief, fear that if I stopped being useful, I would stop being wanted. That kind of giving is not generosity. It is self-protection disguised as generosity, and it creates a dynamic that poisons everyone inside it, including the giver. Real generosity, the kind that Gerald had, the kind I was learning to practice, comes from fullness, not from depletion. You give when you have enough, and it genuinely costs you nothing vital. You give freely, and without keeping score, but you give from abundance, not from need. The second thing I learned was about the difference between being present and being convenient. For 3 years I had been both, and they had blurred together until I couldn't tell which one people were responding to. The October in Clover Ridge had forced that distinction into the open. And what I found when I stopped being convenient was that the people who loved me actually came closer. Ethan did. Slowly, honestly, with effort, he came closer. Rachel did too, in a different way at a different pace with different tools. But she came. Noah had never been anything but close because children have not yet learned to love conditionally, and I want to be like that when I grow up. The third thing I learned was the hardest one, the one I had to sit with the longest, that I turned over in quiet mornings and late evenings and all the spaces in between. I had not done any of this for them. I had canceled those payments for myself. I had cleared that garage for myself. I had driven to the mailbox and driven home and made my tea with steady hands for myself. Every single decision had been an act of self-preservation, not strategy, not wisdom, not anything as noble as I'd sometimes like to tell myself. And that paradoxically was exactly why it worked. Because when you do something from the deep, honest center of your own survival, it's real. It can't be argued with or negotiated or managed because it isn't a position. It's just the truth of a person who has finally decided that she is worth taking seriously. I am worth taking seriously. 67 years old, sitting in my own kitchen in my own house with my own life arranged around me in a way that fits. I am worth taking seriously. Gerald always knew that. He never doubted it for a single day. It took me standing outside a pale blue door holding a handmade telescope to remember it for myself. Thursday came the way important days always do, quietly without announcement, looking exactly like every other morning until you're inside it and realize something is different. I arrived at the bakery on Fernwood Avenue 10 minutes early, not from anxiety, from the habit of a woman who has learned that being early is a form of respect for your own decisions. I ordered coffee, found a table by the window, and sat with my hands around the warm cup and waited. Sandra Delaney walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. I recognized her immediately, though I hadn't seen her in 4 years. She was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was simply more present than I had been the last 3 times we'd occupied the same room, too busy managing my own performance of gracious daughter-in-law's mother to actually see the person in front of me. She saw me, raised a hand, came to the table. We ordered. We sat. And for a moment neither of us spoke, which was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 women who have both done enough living to know that some conversations need a moment before they begin. Sandra spoke first. "Rachel told me what happened," she said. "Most of it. Not everything. She's protective, even now, even with me." A small, complicated smile. "Especially with me." "I know," I said. "She told me what she said, through the window." Sandra looked at her coffee. "She said she was ashamed of it. That's the word she used. Ashamed." "She should be," I said, not cruelly. "And she is, and she's working on it. That matters more than the shame." Sandra nodded slowly. "Can I tell you something that might be difficult to hear?" "Please," I said. "What Rachel did, the way she treated you, the way she let herself think of you, I recognized it," Sandra said, immediately when she described it to me, because it's what I taught her. She said it plainly, without dramatics, with the specific flatness of someone who has already cried about a thing and is now simply carrying it. I taught my daughter that people who give freely are safe to take from, that generosity is a resource and not a gift. I taught her that by doing it myself, for years. The table between us felt very quiet. "You were taken from," I said, not a question. "By my own mother," Sandra said, "and before her, her mother, and so on, probably back further than any of us tracked." She paused. "We were very good at taking care of the chain and very bad at examining it." I thought about what Rachel had said in Donna Haynes's office, about the chain, about being the link that refuses to pass the damage forward. "Rachel is breaking it," I said. "I know," Sandra said. "That's why I'm sitting here." She looked at me directly. "I couldn't break it. I didn't know how. Or maybe I knew how and was too afraid." She set down her cup. But watching my daughter do it, watching her make those calls and write that letter and sit in that therapist's office and come back and try again, it was the most courageous thing I have ever seen anyone do. Something moved in my chest. "Yes," I said quietly. "It was." "I want to learn how to do that," Sandra said. "I'm 63 years old, and I want to learn how to stop taking and start seeing people as people." She held my gaze. "I thought the right place to start was with the woman my daughter hurt most, to sit across from you and say I understand how it happened, and I am sorry for my part in making her the person who did it." I sat with that for a long moment. An apology from the generation above Rachel. The acknowledgement that damage travels downward through families like water, finding cracks, silent and patient and entirely without malice, which makes it no less damaging. You're not responsible for Rachel's choices, I said. She's a grown woman. She made them. No, Sandra agreed, but I am responsible for the pattern I gave her to make them from. She paused. Both things can be true. Yes, I said, both things can be true. We sat in that bakery for 2 hours. We talked about our children, our marriages, the things we'd given away, and the things we'd held back, and the slow, costly education of realizing that you'd confused the two. Sandra had lost her husband 8 years ago. Different circumstances than Gerald, a long illness, years of caregiving, that had left her both exhausted and unmoored. After he died, I didn't know what I was for, she said, and the sentence landed in me with the specific weight of perfect recognition. I know that feeling exactly, I said. I think that's when the taking got worse, she said. For both of us, maybe, in our different ways. We were both feeling something, I said. Yes, she said, with the wrong things. When we left the bakery, we stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the April warmth, and Sandra said, "Can we do this again?" Yes, I said, without hesitation. She nodded, and then she said, "Rachel was right about you." What did she say? Sandra smiled, a real smile, not managed, not composed. She said you were the kind of woman who tells the truth even when it costs her something. She paused. She said she wanted to be more like that. I stood on Fernwood Avenue in the April morning and let that land. Rachel had said that, about me. Tell her, I said, that she already is. I drove home with all 4 windows down, which I never do in April because it's still too cold, and I did it anyway because some mornings require wind. May arrived, and with it the thing I had not known I was waiting for. Not a phone call, not a letter, not a facilitated conversation, or a carefully constructed gesture. Something much simpler and therefore much larger. A Sunday afternoon, my backyard. The kind of May afternoon that is warm enough for the patio chairs and has the specific quality of light that Gerald used to call the good light, low and golden and unhurried. Ethan had called Saturday night. "Mom, can we come Sunday, all of us? Nothing specific, just come." "Come," I said. They arrived at 2. Ethan's arm was fully out of the brace. Rachel brought her good lemon cake, the one I had eaten 3 slices of at Noah's birthday 2 years before, and that I now understood she had made specifically because I loved it, and not as a performance of anything except that. Noah came in carrying his telescope case and his laminated chart, which now had 12 of 17 objects, checked each one, marked with the date found, and a brief note in his careful 10-year-old handwriting. We went to the backyard. It was too early in the afternoon for stars, obviously, so Noah set up the telescope pointed at a distant treetop and adjusted the focus with the concentration of a surgeon and declared the magnification satisfactory for terrestrial observation, which nobody had asked for, but everyone accepted as the correct use of a Saturday afternoon. Rachel and I sat at the patio chairs. Ethan disappeared inside to find something and came back with a beer in his good hand and sat on the porch step the way he used to sit on it as a teenager, back against the post legs stretched out. Nobody was performing anything. That was the thing I kept coming back to, sitting in the good light with my family around me. Nobody was performing. Ethan wasn't being the dutiful son. Rachel wasn't being the composed daughter-in-law. I wasn't being the generous mother who asked for nothing. We were just people in a backyard on a Sunday afternoon, slightly imperfect, mostly healed, genuinely glad to be there. Noah looked up from the telescope. "Grandma," he said. "Can I tell you something?" "Always," I said. "I showed Mrs. Alderman the chart," he said. "She said it was the most systematic amateur observation log she'd ever seen from a student." He paused. "She asked if my grandmother helped me make it." "What did you tell her?" I said. "I told her my grandmother gave me the telescope," he said, "and that my grandfather taught my dad to look at stars and my dad told me about it, and that the chart was mine, but the reason I made it was because of all of them." He looked at me with his grandfather's gray eyes. "Is that right?" I could not speak for a moment. "That's exactly right," I said. Noah nodded, satisfied, and went back to his telescope. Ethan looked at me from the porch step, said nothing. He didn't need to. Rachel reached over from her chair and put her hand briefly on my arm. Just a touch, just a second. just contact, and then took it back and picked up her coffee, and we sat in the good light together, like people who have earned the right to be easy with each other. That moment, that afternoon, that backyard, that was the return on everything. Not the canceled payments or the cleared garage or the document in the mailbox or the 11 minutes of steady hands. All of that had been necessary. The surgery is necessary, but the surgery is not the thing you wanted. The thing you wanted was this, the Sunday afternoon on the other side of it. I looked at Gerald's photograph through the back window, barely visible from where I was sitting, and I thought, "Do you see this?" I was almost certain he did. The last Sunday in May, Noah found his 17th object. Number 17 on the chart was the Andromeda Galaxy, the most ambitious item on the list, the one Mrs. Alderman had said was almost certainly beyond the capability of his equipment from a suburban backyard. Noah had kept it at the bottom of the chart for months, not removing it, simply deferring it the way you keep the hardest problem for when you're ready. He called me at 9:15 at night. His voice was a frequency I had not heard from him before, something between disbelief and reverence. "Grandma," he said. "Noah," I said. "I found it." "Andromeda, Andromeda." A pause. "It doesn't look like what I thought. It's just a smudge, a soft blur. But Mrs. Alderman said that smudge is 2.5 million light years away, and it has 1 trillion stars in it." His voice dropped. "Grandma, 1 trillion. "I know," I said. "That means the light I just saw left there 2.5 million years ago," he said. "Before humans existed. That light has been traveling for 2.5 million years, and tonight it landed in my eye in our backyard." I sat down. Had to. "Noah," I said. "Yeah." "Your grandfather would have made you repeat that sentence 3 times, I said, "and then he would have written it down." A silence. "Can you write it down?" Noah asked. "For me?" "I already am," I said. And I was, on the notepad beside the stove, the one that had Gerald's notes about things that needed fixing. I wrote, "The light has been traveling for 2.5 million years. Tonight it landed in Noah's eye in our backyard. May 10:15 at night. He found all 17. I tore the page off and folded it and put it in the drawer where I keep the things that matter." "Grandma," Noah said, "I'm here." "I'm going to add a second page to the chart," he said. 17 more. "Of course you are," I said. "Will you help me pick them?" "Noah," I said, "I cannot think of a single thing I would rather do." He went to get a pencil. I sat in my kitchen in the May night with the phone warm in my hand and the notepad in front of me and Gerald's photograph on the shelf, and I thought about what it means to have a life that keeps opening instead of closing. I had spent 3 years closing, giving everything outward and closing inward smaller and smaller until I was barely taking up the space I'd been given on this earth. Then one Thursday in October I stopped. I placed a gift beside a door. I walked to my car. I drove home. And everything that came after the 11 minutes, the document, the garage, the phone calls, the therapy office, the hospital corridor, the bakery on Fernwood Avenue, the backyard in the good light, the notepad, Noah's voice saying 1 trillion, all of it came from that one moment of choosing myself. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a woman turning around, walking back down the path. I want to tell you what my life looks like now. Not because it's a lesson, though it is, but because I think sometimes we need to hear that things can actually change, that it's not too late, that the door you think is locked is sometimes just heavy. I walk with Linda on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. We have solved most of the world's problems on those walks and created several new ones, and I would not trade it for anything. I take ceramics on Wednesday evenings. My bowls are better. Not good yet, but better. Sasha says I have developed a signature. I told her signatures are just consistent mistakes you've decided to own, and she said that was either profound or defeatist, and she couldn't decide which, and I told her probably both. I read to the after-school children at the library on Fridays. There is a 6-year-old named Oliver who always sits in the front and interrupts to ask questions that are technically off topic but always exactly to the point. He reminds me of Noah. He reminds me of Gerald. He reminds me of everyone I have ever loved who was curious enough to ask the real question underneath the easy one. I fly to Phoenix twice a year. Barbara has given me a key to the guest room, which she says is so I can let myself in when she's not home, but which is actually so I know I always have a place there. Gerald's family was practical about love, so is Barbara. So eventually am I. Rachel and I have coffee every other week. Just the two of us, no agenda, no facilitation. We are not best friends. We may never be. But we are honest with each other in a way we never were before. And honest is worth more than friendly in the long run. And we are building towards something that I think might eventually be both. Sandra and I have had 4 more bakery mornings. She is learning at 63 to examine the patterns she inherited and decide which ones to keep. I am learning at 67 that it is never too late to be a beginning of something different in the chain. Ethan is painting this birchwood fence himself. It is taking longer than expected because he is doing it properly. 2 coats, proper primer. Gerald's advice on wood preparation that I recited to him from memory one Sunday morning, and that he wrote down on his phone with the focused respect of a student who has finally found the right teacher. He calls me on his way home from work twice a week, not for anything, just to talk, just to be my son. Noah is on his second chart. 32 objects cross-referenced by season and by what his equipment can realistically achieve, with a separate column for objects that will require a better telescope, which he has noted is a long-term goal for his 14th birthday, and which he has already discussed with Ethan in terms that Ethan described to me as frankly alarming in their specificity. Gerald's encyclopedias are on the shelf in Noah's room at Birchwood, arranged alphabetically with the astronomy volumes within easy reach. The spine of the A volume is slightly cracked from use. Noah reads them the way Gerald read them, not for facts, but for the pleasure of understanding how things connect. I know this because he calls me to tell me what he finds. Last week he called to tell me that the word telescope comes from the Greek words for far and to look. That it was first used in that form in 1611, the same year the King James Bible was published, which he found interesting because they were both in their way attempts to see things more clearly. I sat with that for a long time, both attempts to see things more clearly. I think about that a lot, about what it means to be willing to look at a thing clearly, even when it's far away, even when the light has been traveling for so long that by the time it reaches you, the source has already changed. You still look, you still try to see. That is what happened in my family, not all at once, not without cost, but we looked. We looked at each other clearly, finally, after years of comfortable blurring, and what we found underneath the damage and the taking and the giving and the fear and the shame and all the complicated ways that love goes wrong when we stop tending it, honestly, was each other. Actually, each other. I did not get a perfect family. I got a real one. And real, I am here to tell you, sitting in my own kitchen in the summer morning light with Gerald's photograph on the shelf and a bowl I made myself on the counter and a notepad full of things worth writing down, real is the only thing that was ever worth having. I chose myself on a Thursday in October, and by choosing myself, I gave the people I loved the chance to choose me too. Not because I paid them to, not because I made myself indispensable, but because I finally had the courage to find out if they would. They did. That is the whole story. That is enough.